volunteers. We're going to talk about saddling today, proper saddle placement, some notes about how to get the saddle on correctly, and then also where bareback pads go on the horse in relation to the saddle. So once again, we're going to use Dylan as our model because he's so handsome and so great. And I grabbed his saddle that I'm going to show you how to put on first. I grabbed this extra pad. He does not usually wear this, but I just wanted to show where it would go if you had a horse that does wear this. So first things first, the saddle pad should always be off of the saddle, disconnected from the saddle. Mainly in the summer here, we need to turn them upside down so they dry, which is why we disconnect them. So you're going to want to grab that first independently from the saddle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do everything from the left side of Dylan. I'm going to put the saddle pad a little bit further up on his neck than it's going to end up being in the end. The reason being is if I started back here and slid the pad forward, all of his hair would be ruffled the wrong way. But if I start here and slide back, then it smooths his hair down, which is much more comfortable. So I'm going to put that saddle pad pretty far forward. I'm not going to worry about the placement too much. And the Mattis pad goes right on top of that. I try to line up the two in the front so that you don't have, the Mattis pad way back here or way up here. They should be lined up in front, and then that's going to ensure that they go in the correct spot on the saddle. Next, I'm going to grab his actual saddle. And we have two types of English saddles that we use out here in terms of billet straps and girths. I wanted to show what a saddle with long billet straps look like, but if you're struggling with short billet straps like Nora's saddle, please let us know because we can help with that. So when you're ready to saddle, kind of like my bridling video, I'm just going to encourage you to take things slow and easy and gentle on the horse. Our horses have a pretty stressful job, and one of the ways they tend to show it is by being girthy. And so if you are relaxed and gentle with them, it helps them be calm during the process, so everybody's much happier. So you'll notice when I put this up on his back, I'm not pushing it from this direction, which is hard if you're short, but I'm going to try as much as possible to get it up on top of him and gently set it down on top of those pads. The next thing, I'm not going to worry about the straps underneath quite yet because now I want to move the saddle back into place. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I used to teach my day campers because I had kids that were constantly trying to figure out where to put the saddle in the right spot. And what I would tell them is before you move the saddle back, you need to give the saddle and the pad a wedgie. That's what I called it because kids love that term. So if you put one hand underneath the pad in the back of the saddle and one hand underneath the pad on the front of the saddle, what I'm going to do is slide this back into place, but I'm also going to lift up and slide it back to give the pad a little wedgie in the area of the saddle that doesn't make contact with the horse, and I'll show you why in a second. So again, I lift up and slide back, and now you can see that the pad has a little bit of an area here where it's not across Dylan's withers. If I didn't do that wedgie, this would have been spread out across his withers, which can cause rubbing. So I like to tuck the pad up in both the front and the back to give them a little bit of breathing room here in the front part of their shoulder. So then the next thing is I kind of automatically knew where that saddle was supposed to go, but if you're not familiar with our horses and our tack, a good rule of thumb is that we always want the horse to have free movement of their shoulder. The saddle fitter that works with our program tends to fit the saddles so that they are always behind the shoulder. This is something that can vary from barn to barn and from saddle to saddle because sometimes you'll see, saddles that are up a little bit on the shoulder or right behind the shoulder, but you really want, I would say, at least a finger behind this area, and you can feel where it is. And what I want to do is I want to prevent when Dylan is moving that shoulder from the saddle hitting him every stride when he's moving that part of his body. So that's how I know the correct location. I can double check that I don't have it too far back because you'll notice if I have it here, I'm crossing this line where there's a hair colic. That's way too far back. And you can see the shoulder pretty clearly right here. I can fit a whole hand in there. Again, I just want about 1 or 2 fingers behind that shoulder. So this is a good chance for me to go up and show that wedgie slide back one more time. One hand in front, one hand behind, up, and gently back into place. Then, underneath the saddle, there are some straps, both for the Mattis pad and the the saddle pad itself, it really does not matter if you attach these. I tend to not attach them. I just put them underneath the flap. But as long as your saddle is fitting well, this is not going to cause anything to slide around on the horse. But if you want to, and you want to be technical, these straps could go around the billet straps, and you can just, you know, undo the Velcro and put it in. Personally, I think it just gets in the way when it's time to take the saddle off and put it away, because there's more to disconnect. So typically what I do is I just make sure they're not, you know, bunched up. I just lay them flat underneath, and then the rider's leg will hold them steady in place.
And I'm going to input too, making sure that they're not sitting underneath the saddle flap here, so it doesn't bunch against the horse is really important.
Yeah, as long as they're flat, they're not an issue. You can put the billet straps through the bottom strap of the saddle pad. That's kind of helpful for keeping them in place. But again, these top ones not a huge deal. It doesn't really matter. So technically I would go over and do everything on the other side, make sure everything looks good, and adjust it, and I will in just a minute. But I do want to point out that Katie has been working very hard to get all of the girths labeled, because we have so many saddles and so many horses. And just so you know, the label is always going to go on the left side of the horse, the side that the rider gets on the horse from. It doesn't really matter with Dylan's saddle girth because it's symmetrical, but some of our girths are asymmetrical, and so you do need to pay attention to where that label is to ensure that the girth is facing the right way. That has to do with keeping saddles in place, but Dylan's saddle fits him well, so it stays in place without that. So a couple things when you're putting the girth on. This was a huge one I always taught my day campers. Never, ever, ever put the billet strap through the bottom part of the buckle. It gets very jammed when you do that. You have to put the billet right underneath this rolling part, and then attach it. Again, if you put it like this and try to attach it, you can see the difference. They're very hard to get unstuck when people do that on accident. So typically when you are working with a horse that has a short girth like this rather than a long girth that would go underneath the flap, typically you want to put the girth on, you know, maybe 1 or 2 holes, or about, I kind of look at the distance from the bottom of the billet strap to the saddle, and I want the girth to go about halfway or a little under halfway to make sure that when I go to the other side, it's not too loose, so that it can be, you know, even on both sides, but also that it's not too tight where I can't attach it on the other side. So that's kind of trial and error, but let's go over to the other side and then I'll show how to actually attach that. So I should have done this before, but I wanted to show how that girth went on that side. Notice when I put the saddle on here, the billets went underneath, so that would be one thing that I want to make sure they're not bunched up underneath Dylan's pad. And again, I'm just going to make sure that these are kind of tucked underneath the saddle and flat so that Dylan's happy. I'm going to double check that everything looks even, and that again it's behind his shoulder on this side. And then this is the part where I'm going to go very slow and very gentle. Dylan is not a very girthy horse, but a lot of our horses are. So when you put the billet into the roller side of the girth, really slowly and gentle. I mean, not torturing the horse because you're going so slow, but I don't want to yank. I want my movements to be very purposeful and not surprise the horse. A lot of times that's when you'll get the biggest reaction from a girthy horse, is when you surprise them. So you'll notice he didn't even flinch there because I was being kind and respectful to him, which is a big part of what we ask with our horses. So that's kind of saddling in a nutshell. To unsaddle, make sure you take the girth off on both sides. And then kind of the opposite of what we did when we were lifting the saddle on, where I talked about I don't want to push it up there. Same thing, I don't want to drag this down his side, so I'm going to try to lift up and off of his back so that he's happier with that. I'm going to set this down real quick. Actually, Sarah, can I hand this to you?
Can I make one
sorry.
thing? Each of our saddles has, on the other side, sorry, we can set it down, has a label also, because we do have some horses that share saddles. So each of our saddles is labeled right here where our grab strap is, with their name. And if they share, it will say which saddle rack it should be sitting on. So like I know Odie and Willie sometimes share saddles. It should be sitting on Willie, and it will say Willie on here. on where it should sit in the tack room.
Perfect. And that's the same side as the girth.
Yep.
Where the label for the girth goes. Okay, I want to talk about bareback pads for a minute. So a bareback pad has a girth attached and has a billet strap where you can attach a girth. What we call a Western pad does not. It's just an extra cushion for the horse. So sometimes you'll see an instructor write one bareback, or sometimes you'll see two bareback. If we want to really protect the horse's back, we'll do two barebacks. If we are looking for the rider to get a lot of input from the horse, especially like in hippotherapy, we tend to use just a bareback pad. But just check the board. If it says 1 BB, just use the one with the girth. If it says 2 BB, you need a Western pad underneath your bareback pad. So in terms of where to put this on the horse, again, do everything from the left side. And start with the bareback pad forward so that you can slide it back. Sorry, the Western pad, just like we did the saddle pad. And when you put the bareback pad on, kind of the same thing as the saddle, where I'm just looking to make sure everything, you know, it's not completely lined up in front. It's a little bit behind the front of the Western pad, and that there's a little room in back too. And I'm gonna, same thing as the saddle, I'm gonna move it back into place. And this is a little bit easier than the saddle because all you have to look at is where this girth is gonna hang. You want the girth to go right behind the horse's front leg. So I want a straight line from here to right behind the horse's front leg. If I were to have it up here, you can see that that straight line goes on his leg. If it's too far back, you'll notice there's a big gap behind his front leg. So I want there to be a straight line right there. We do leave these girths attached all the time. We do not do that on our saddles because our saddle billets are leather and so they will warp if you leave it attached. This is nylon, so it doesn't matter if you leave the girth attached, and it's actually nice because then we don't lose them. But same thing as the saddle, I'm gonna look that this is about halfway. Go on the other side. I won't show it just because I don't want this video to be 8 hours long, but same thing as the saddle where I'm gonna gently tighten it up. You want this pad and the saddle to be snug enough that it's gonna hold the saddle in place, but not so tight that it's going to be ready for a rider. We do that in the arena. So that's, I think, good for a bareback pad. The last thing I want to talk about is a surcingle. We do not use these very commonly, but just so you know, this is called the anti-cast roller, or ACR, sometimes we abbreviate it. So this is a surcingle. If we want a rider to have something to hold on to, that bareback pad has a little flap, but it's really flimsy, so if we want something firm, we would use this for the rider. And it's the same thing where you want a Western pad, and just like that bareback pad, all I'm looking for in positioning this is where the girth lays. I want the girth to go right behind the horse's front leg, so as long as it is in that position, it should be good to go. So if you have any questions, please comment on the video, let us know. We are here to help, and I'm sure there are some things that I missed, but hopefully that gives you an idea of saddling. Thank you. Okay.